Our motivation is influenced by the energy in our body and the quality of the thinking in our mind. But it's also important to note that our energy and our thinking are influenced by the structure of our life and the nature of our environments. Hello, it's Charles again. And if you've been watching my videos on motivation, then you already know that motivation is a complex subject and it can't fully be understood with any one idea. But in understanding motivation one, the idea that I shared was this. Motivation is an emotion, and emotions change all the time based on situation. If we think about our situation holistically, we can consider what's happening in our body, what's happening in our mind, and what's happening in our life. Now, I've previously made videos that address what's going on in our body and how that could affect our motivation. And I also made a video on how the quality of our thinking could affect our motivation. And so in this video, I want to talk more about how the structure and nature of our life influences our motivation. Okay, so there are many ways that we might try to describe the structure of someone's life. But me personally, I love the 8 dimensions of wellness as a holistic framework that we can use to view the structure or foundation of our life. Now, if you've never heard of the 8 dimensions of wellness before, it simply says this. In addition to thinking about our physical health and wellness, we can also consider our environmental, emotional, intellectual, occupational, financial, social, and spiritual well-being. Now, as I say those 8 things, you're probably already understanding and thinking about connections between dimensions. And so here's part of the benefit of looking at our lives holistically. Growth or success in one dimension can support growth and success in another dimension. And by the same token, challenges in one dimension may also present challenges to growth in another dimension. Okay, so I'm going to try to present a lot of ideas about how the structure of our life is connected to our feeling of motivation and our tendency towards certain behaviors. And I'm going to do it with a lot of analogies and stories. And so the first place I want to start is this. If we think about structure, when you're trying to build a house, what's the most important part of the house? Many people say foundation, and I would agree. But when we have a shaky life foundation, it can be difficult to build positive habits on that shaky foundation. Okay, here's a couple analogies around this idea of how our foundation affects our motivation. If you are standing on solid, flat ground, firm ground, and your goal is just a little bit above your head and you have to jump to reach your goal, how motivated will you be to jump to reach your goal when you're on solid ground and it's just right there in front of you? The answer is likely you'll be pretty motivated because it's right there in front of you. All you gotta do is jump up and grab it. But let's change the scenario a little bit. Let's say in this second scenario, you're standing on 2 rickety fence posts over a boiling lake of lava, and your goal is not only a little bit higher, but kind of off to the side. How motivated will you be to jump after this goal? If you really desire it, you may still jump, but your motivation will likely be a little bit less because if you jump and miss, the chance of you landing safely is a little bit less sure. And so again, when there is unsteadiness and shakiness in our life, we generally feel less motivated to jump. And that may sound familiar to many of you. It's kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just wrapped in a little bit different present. And so again, when we have shaky foundation in certain areas of our life, it may decrease our motivation to jump after certain goals. All right, now speaking of shakiness and goals, I want to go back to an idea that I shared in the video about our body and how our body could affect our motivation. And I want to revisit the analogy of the body budget. So recapping this conversation about body budget, our brain evolved to regulate our body. And so when our body budget is in deficit, when we have a lack of physical resources, it's more likely that our brain will freak out and we're more likely to experience negative emotions. And when our internal resources are strong, balanced, or surplus, then it's more likely that we will experience a positive emotion. So again, our brain is a predictive machine. And so based on internal resources, it predicts and we feel a certain way. Well, the same thing happens in our brain when we consider external resources. And so when our brain looks at our life, if it sees a lack of resources, it is also likely that we will experience negative emotions. As an example, here's just some of the resources that we might find in our life: free time, financial resources, social support, and access. So if we look at our life and we think, I don't really have time, I don't really have money, I don't really have support, I don't really have easy access to this thing, then we won't be as motivated to pursue it. And so again, our brain does this trick both when it is assessing internal resources and external resources. Now, this doesn't mean that if we have a shaky life foundation or a lack of resources that we can't thrive and overcome and achieve, because you may have incidents in your own life where your situation was challenging, but because it was important to you, you focused, you worked, you were dedicated, you found a way to make it work. And so our life does not have to be perfect for us to accomplish great things. But I just want to make the point that when our life is a little bit shaky and we perceive that we don't have resources, our feeling of motivation is generally a little bit less. Okay, so as we're talking about resources, I want to come to another idea where I think a lot of us get stuck. And it is this challenge between desire and practicality. And so those things sometimes pull against us and it can affect our motivation. And I sometimes call it the practicality motivational trap. I know that sounds crazy, but let me give you an idea about what it sounds like. And then maybe you'll understand this push and pull between desire and practicality. In our society, we value dramatic transformation. We've got shows for dramatic transformations in every realm: Extreme Home Makeover, Biggest Loser, American Idol, you just go on and on. And so we see these things where someone seems to change their life dramatically in what appears to be an instant. And of course, that is very exciting for us emotionally and mentally, because who wouldn't want to change their life for the better in an instant? But here's where some of us get stuck. The plan associated with the dramatic transformation is usually nowhere near practical because we don't have those type of resources to put into our own situation. And so we look at and idolize this outcome that is so grand, but the plan does not fit in our life. And so that's where we get stuck. I want this, but it doesn't fit. And so if we contrast that, often there are practical things that we can do that might not create a dramatic transformation overnight, but will tend to move us in the direction of progress and towards our goal. But the practical thing doesn't excite us as much. We're not as motivated to do the practical, easy thing. And so as an example, if in a given day you have 10 minutes to fit in structured movement or exercise, but in your mind, you're like, no, I want to do the hour-long class that's going to get me ripped and it's going to lead to this dramatic result. But the hour-long class doesn't fit. And so what happens is the 10 minutes that you can do starts to pale in comparison. And when we mentally look down on something, it's less likely that we will actually pursue it. And I'm reminded of a quote from Arthur Ashe. It's such a brilliant quote. And it says, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And so sometimes if we can tap into that mindset when our life doesn't necessarily allow us to do the dramatic transformation, if we focus on what we can do, if we focus on the resources that we have, and if we can just get ourselves going, then over time, maybe we can expand what is practical. And as we expand what is practical, then it also expands our opportunity for growth. But again, a lot of people get stuck because they never take that first practical step because they're so focused on this big thing that just doesn't fit. Okay. Now, another thought about desire and behavior or motivation. Much of the time, when we are trying to get motivated, we exclusively focus on desire and willpower. But I want to contrast desire and willpower to structure and design and how each one may support our behavior and our motivation. Okay, so another little funny story, or let's say a silly analogy. If you work at a desk in an office, and at the end of the day, I ran up to you and I said, "Oh my goodness, you have such unbelievable motivation. I can't believe you just sat in the desk for 8 straight hours." You would look at me like I'm crazy and be like, that wasn't motivation. That's just the structure of my day. That's just what I do. And if I was going to keep going with the analogy and I was being silly, if I ran up to a cashier at the end of the day and said, "Oh my goodness, you have unbelievable willpower. How do you do it? I can't believe you stood in the same place for 8 hours straight." Again, the person would look at me like I'm crazy, call security. Now, the point is this. Much of the behavior that we actually do is not a result of conscious willpower and motivation. It is a result of the structure and the nature of our lives. And so if we are trying to be motivated to do a behavior, one thing that we can do is look at the structure of our life and see, can we design it so that it supports the behavior that we're trying to include? Because if the structure and the design supports a behavior, then we don't have to rely on willpower and desire as much to accomplish progress in that area. Now, this isn't to say that we shouldn't use motivation and willpower to override some of our structural challenges. So just as an example of this structural challenge, if we lived right next to a gym at one point, that structure may have made it easy for us to get to the gym. Oh, I'm motivated because it's easy. There's something practical and I can start really easily. But then we may move or our gym closed and now the gym is 20 minutes away. And so that extra structure serves as a motivational impediment. Now, we can potentially move to a place that's close to the gym, or we can use willpower and motivation and our thinking to get back into that habit. Okay, so structure of our life influences our motivation to do things. And what I would say is that if I use the word resource, the structure of our life makes resources either more or less available for us. Okay, I want to make another point about desire and how the structure of our life can make it challenging or easier for us to be motivated to do certain activities. And it's the idea that we often have competing desires, competing interests, and competing goals. So as an example, let's say it's a Friday night and you're at work and you have an important project that you're working on. Do you stay later and finish this project? You're good at work, you love your job, you know that this project can mean a lot to your team and to your company? Or do you leave early so that you can go to your kid's soccer game? Or do you leave on time and go to the gym? Or do you leave and go socialize with friends after work? So we may have all of these competing goals. We may want to take care of our physical health by going to the gym. We may want to support our kids and our family by going to their events. We may want to socialize and bond and connect with our work friends. And we may want to focus on work and use our intellectual power to forward something that is meaningful to us. So again, if there are multiple things that we are interested in, they are going to compete for our time and our energy. And what happens in this situation is, of course, there's a priority list, and the priority list may change day to day. But most likely what will happen is the thing that is the top priority is where we will point our time and energy. Now, this doesn't mean that the thing that's in fourth place isn't important to us. And so again, one of the challenges that we have is when we have competing goals, it can be very difficult to spend the same amount of time and energy in each area. Now, here's a note. What a lot of people do when they have competing goals and they can't fully embrace and engage in all of them is they start to use guilt and shame. And sometimes guilt potentially can motivate us, but more often than not, guilt and shame actually serve to make us feel worse and actually decreases our motivation. So what I would say is that if you have competing interests, it may be useful to acknowledge that you have competing interests in multiple things that are important to you. And when you can't do all of them, instead of beating yourself up, just acknowledge that in this moment, you're putting more priority on one thing. And that in another moment, you'll have an opportunity to put time and energy into something else. Okay. The last thought that I want to share about life and health is this. It can be so useful to look at our lives holistically when we are considering our physical health. But what happens naturally is that we tend to zoom in on physical health and physical wellness. And the reason we zoom in on physical health as a dimension is that our body acts as the messenger. And our body is the one that gives us the signal that something is wrong. So we naturally zoom in and say, what's wrong with our body? But what if our body is giving us the message that something in our life is out of balance? Now, people ask me this all the time. Are you a life coach or are you a wellness coach? And if we think about it, there's no way that we can separate our physical health from the nature of our life. And you may know this from your own experience or by watching other people. But let's say, for example, that you or someone you know has experienced a lot of stress. Some life situation is stressing them out. Their blood pressure is high, their eating patterns are off, they're feeling anxious, they're not sleeping well. And so again, they're having physical symptoms. Now, you can go to a sleep doctor and talk about all the things that you can do to get better sleep. But if your life situation is such that it is making you feel a certain way, then all the little tips and tricks about sleep might not be the thing that solves the problem. But maybe the stressful situation changes. You could have been in a toxic work environment or in a job that wasn't fit for your skills. And so you're feeling stressed because the job that you're in doesn't feel like a fit for whatever reason. You get a new job, you get a promotion, and all of a sudden your symptoms, your physical symptoms go away. You start sleeping like a baby. You're filled with joy and energy and vitality. Because again, the nature and the structure of our life has a huge influence on what happens in our body and also what happens in our mind. Now, I fully acknowledge that it's not always easy to change our life situations. But what I'll say is this: we have overcome life situations many times in the past. Whether it was we struggled in a school subject, or we had some physical challenge, or we had financial struggles, or we had social challenges, or we could have had environmental challenges. We are resilient as people. We are creative. We persevere. And so just because our life situation may be challenged doesn't mean that we can't thrive in the present or thrive in the future. Okay, now I want to put my coaching hat on before I go, as always, and ask a question. And the question is this: I want you to think about some health and wellness goal or personal goal that you have, and it can be in any of the 8 dimensions of wellness. Now, the question I want you to answer is there strength and resources in another dimension that can support your ability to accomplish this personal goal that you have? It may be that you are a very social person. And so you might look at your personal goal and say, how can I tap into my social network, which is one of my strengths, to support me as I try to pursue this personal goal? Or you may be a very spiritual person. And you might think to yourself, how can I lean on my faith? How can I tap into my spirituality as a way to support me in this personal goal? Or you may look to your environment and you may say, what do I have near me? What do I have in my environment? What do I have access to that can support me as I pursue this personal goal? And when you find something else in your life that supports your personal goal, hopefully that helps to move you forward and it supports you and gives you motivation to go after that goal. Okay, I know I've said a lot, but I hope that you've now seen some of the connections in the line of thinking from the first video to this one. And so just to kind of recap my line of thinking, in understanding motivation 1, we began by saying that motivation is an emotion, and emotions change all the time based on our situation. If we think about our situation holistically, we can consider what's happening in our body, what's happening in our mind, and what's happening in our life. And so we can affect our own motivation by better managing our body and our energy, by better regulating our thoughts and our emotions through focus and story. And we can increase our motivation by looking at the structure of our life. We can make tweaks to the structure of our life so that it supports the behaviors that we desire. And we can also look at our life holistically for areas of strength and find those areas of strength so that we can apply them to our current goal to give us more confidence and a feeling of motivation that we can accomplish that goal. I've said a lot, but I hope that you've gained at least one insight or had at least one personal aha moment that you can use going forwards. Now, obviously, there's so much more that can be said about motivation. So I'd like you to think of this as just a starting point. Take what ideas make sense to you, use what you can apply, and hopefully that will help you to reach your health and wellness goals. In creating these videos, I'd like to share a perspective, and I'm hoping that my perspective can help you to coach yourself. But if you ever stop and think, it'll be kind of cool if I had Charles as my coach, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, charlesinniss.com, and get in contact with me so we can talk about what it might look like if we decided to work together. I appreciate you for listening till the end, and until later, be well.